Hello, and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Evan Halper. I cover the energy transition on the business desk here at the Post. Today, we'll be joined by Brian Deese, who's the former director of the National Economic Council under President Biden, and now an innovation fellow at MIT. Brian, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Evan, it's great to see you.
All right, let's get started here. So let's talk about your Clean Energy Marshall Plan. You've been making the case for this Clean Energy Marshall Plan, which essentially outlines how the U.S. could sell clean power to the world. Can you talk to us, give us the elevator pitch of this Clean Energy Marshall Plan and how it would work?
Sure. First, you got to start with the context of what's happening here at home. And as that intro video previewed, we are on the front end of a historic boom in energy investment and energy innovation in the United States. Clean investment is up 71% over the last 2 years. So much investment that actually clean investment is responsible for half of all private investment growth in the United States today. Clean manufacturing up particularly strongly as well. So as we look at our economic imperatives as a country, a key question is how do we extend those gains? And how do we do that in a way that actually accelerates clean energy deployment globally? And that's where a Marshall Plan style effort to have the United States be a credible partner, a genuine partner working with emerging market allies and strategic allies around the world to accelerate clean energy deployment can be both important to solving the global climate crisis and incredibly powerful economic driver here at home. And that will take leadership, it will take focus, it will take a strategic prioritization, but we have a better economic position to actually take advantage of those opportunities today than we have in some significant period of time. And we have more pressure and more urgency to do so because of the strategic risks and threats that the climate crisis poses globally as well. So we have a real opportunity here, and I think we have a geostrategic and economic reason to take advantage of it.
Can you unpack that a little bit further? Give us an example of something we're not doing now that we could be doing with global partners under this plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think there's a couple of core elements of what would we actually do if we were to take this really seriously. I think the first is a significantly stepped up finance authority, finance capability for the United States to show up in country with partners and help them deploy at scale. Now, we have tools today, we have capabilities, we have experience that we can bring to bear, but we're not doing that with the kind of scale and flexibility that it takes. I'll just give you one example. We were proud to work in 2022 with Egypt on a partnership that enabled $10 billion of investment into solar in Egypt. And for relatively small public investment of US resources, we were able to scale that. But realistically, we were running around with a very limited set of tools to try to put that partnership together. Imagine if that wasn't 10 billion, it was 100 billion. Imagine if we were helping to help Egypt and other countries around the world become leaders in not just solar, but also cutting edge technologies like storage, long duration storage, and geothermal and hydrogen. Imagine if we were showing up in a credible way as an alternative to China's Belt and Road and saying we can partner, and also we want to put US innovators, US technologies in the mix and at the front of the line in that effort. That would be better for us economically. It would also be better for these countries to have a more credible, reliable partner in helping to scale energy technologies, and it would help to accelerate clean energy deployment, which is what we need to help fight the climate crisis.
In terms of where the investment would come from, I mean, $100 billion is not a small number, and obviously there's never enough money to go around. I mean, is this public investment, and where does it come from?
Well, look, that example really proves the case, which is we were able to put together a small amount of public investment, about $250 million, some of which the United States contributed, to help put into a facility to actually leverage very large quantums of private capital to invest in that particular instance. And that's possible around the world, in large part because this is a place where, different from the experience that President Truman and Marshall faced back in the late 1940s, clean energy technologies are scaling commercially and rapidly, and there's incredible commercial demand and private capital demand. But we need public capital to deploy in a flexible and nimble way to actually unlock that private sector investment. So it's incredibly important that the US has more tools and is using those tools of economic statecraft in a more creative, aggressive way. But it doesn't require that the US or any other country balance sheet take that on all themselves. It just requires being more creative and more ambitious in the deployment of those tools.
So you're advising the vice president's presidential campaign. Has she expressed support for these kinds of ideas?
Well, I'm going to let Vice President Harris speak for herself on this issue and every issue. But I would say, if you look at what she is saying, she is projecting, I think, both a bold but also pragmatic and sensible approach to how we actually extend our economic strength and also our leadership on clean energy and climate as well. She's talking about how do we harvest the economic benefits of implementing the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law in a way that actually unlocks growth? How do we actually build and give our innovators more space to deploy? And she's also talking about the strategic importance of us leading internationally. And she's not just talking the talk, she's also demonstrated that as vice president. She showed up on the global stage and helped to engineer some of these important agreements that would be the foundation off of which we could build as well. So I think in Vice President Harris, you have somebody who is both quite experienced on this set of issue and brings that experience and that perspective, but also very pragmatic about this, understanding that a lot of what we need to do here at home is actually break down very practical bottlenecks to building and scaling. That's going to take working with business and labor. It's going to take being willing to actually take on some of the red tape and some of the things that actually keep us from moving more quickly. So I think that that's the kind of approach that you could expect from Vice President Harris as president.
So you've stressed also that this kind of Marshall Plan could have a bipartisan appeal. It's growth, it's private markets, but it seems like only a certain kind of Republican would support this, especially with public investment involved, and it's kind of a shrinking type of Republican. In the event of a Trump administration, of a trifecta of Republicans, I mean, is this really a plan that could be sold to Republicans, or with the posture of a future Trump administration, is this just too heavy a lift?
Well, let me separate those out into two things. I think the first is there is broad agreement and growing agreement that we as the United States need to be more ambitious and more strategic about how we meet the growing competition with China in key regions around the world and with key allies around the world. And we should be clear-eyed about the fact that China is ahead in many of these markets and is often using statist and non-market means to press that advantage and build significant overcapacity to try to flood global markets while actually underinvesting domestically. And that's an economic strategy that is not sustainable, and it's not a global strategy that is sustainable if we want to actually have a strategy that will accelerate clean energy adoption and lead to balanced economic growth. I think there's growing recognition, again, across in strange bedfellow coalitions of business and traditional Republicans, Democrats, recognizing we need to be more ambitious around that. I think that was the same kind of coalition that we brought together to pass the CHIPS Act, to pass the infrastructure bill, that were about investing in our capabilities domestically to make sure that we were positioned to win that competition. And many of the ideas we're talking about here, for example, a resilience authority to actually invest in critical mineral diversification and supply chain resilience, is something that there's support from Democrats and Republicans on the Hill. The idea of having carbon border adjustments to the United States can be more proactive in promoting a level playing field globally, bipartisan support as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to work on this pragmatically. I think that is separate from the threats and risks that a Trump presidency poses to the climate and to our clean energy goals internationally. And I think that those are significant. But I think in terms of pragmatic ability to build bipartisan coalitions on this front, I think there's a lot of opportunity for sure.
So there's a lot of investment going on in the US right now in clean energy after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. And I mean, there's just like a frenzy of activity and a lot of building. And we see new plants getting built to make batteries and battery storage and all these other, hydrogen, all these other clean energy things. Yet we're still really struggling to meet our climate goals. As I understand, we're falling short of the goal of cutting emissions in half by 2030. And I mean, with all this activity and all this investment, what's going on? Where's the disconnect? Why are we falling so far short?
It's a great question. It's the issue that keeps me up most at night when I think about this set of issues, because we've now put in place, I think, a very effective long-term set of technology neutral incentives to invest in the US. we're seeing a very significant private sector response. You talk to companies in the US and globally, and they say, look, the US is an attractive place to invest because these are stable, predictable incentives, and the US market provides a lot of innovative capacity, a lot of labor opportunities. This is an interesting place to invest. And the issue now is we need to remove the constraints to build. We need to have a approach to clean deployment that has the feel of build, baby, build. We have to be very aggressive and creative about removing the constraints on the supply side. And some of those go to getting better at building quicker, while also representing our values and fairness. But some of that also goes to looking at the structure of how our utility-based energy production system in the United States works and operates. And that is, as the intro video said, that is often relatively unsexy work. It feels can get very wonky very quickly, but we're going to have to learn to take these things very seriously and learn to love these issues, because they're going to be what actually breaks open more deployment. Something like, how do we get more out of our existing transmission system? The Post has written a bunch about this, dynamic line rating and other grid enhancing technologies. Again, you can get into the weeds pretty quickly, but the bottom line is we need to get more out of our existing transmission system, and we can. We actually have technologies that would unlock enormous additional potential, but we have to create the market incentives, the market structure, so that utilities have an incentive to invest in those, and that we're actually prioritizing those types of solutions that would get more clean energy at scale going here in the US.
I do want to talk to you about transmission. Got a lot of questions about that. But before we get to it, I also want to talk about climate goals. I just have one more question about that. I mean, a lot of companies have made these commitments. They said, you know, we're going to push forward. We're going to get to net zero by X period of time. And then we just keep seeing backsliding. You know, we keep seeing that, like, a big energy company that said they were going to do X, Y, and Z, suddenly they're just doing X and Y and Z, or, you know, or a tech company, and this just keeps happening. And so I guess my question is, you know, are the things that the Biden administration passed too much carrot and not enough stick? Does there need to be more regulation, not just tax breaks and, you know, incentives to push companies to get with the program and meet some of the targets that, you know, the White House is trying to meet?
Look, I think we should be pragmatic about this, but I also think that we need to be ambitious in saying what's the framework that's actually going to get us to those goals, not just a framework to allow people to pledge to get to those goals. And I think one of the areas that you see this most saliently today is in the return to load growth, the return to energy demand, in part because of the extraordinary rise of artificial intelligence and the data center capacity needed to drive that capability in the US. And here we have two very important national objectives. We want to expand our AI and innovative capability, want to extend our lead on those technologies and make sure that that is both safe and secure and happening in the United States. And we also want to meet that energy demand in a way that is clean and actually helps to accelerate toward our clean energy goals. Doing that is hard, but it is absolutely feasible. What it requires is creativity and a commitment between the public and private sector to work together toward those goals, rather than to say, well, one goal seems more urgent today, so we're just going to discard or put the other goal on the back burner. In this case, for example, I think historically there's good analogs to say, if what you do is you say, we're going to use demand in one sector to actually help drive greater demand in another, meaning demand for AI innovation to drive more demand for clean energy technologies, we could end up creating a virtuous cycle where the United States sees a boom in our technological capability, our innovative capability on both. But that's going to require policy, and it's going to require a willingness to use both carrots and sticks to encourage people who actually are prepared to invest in strategies that hit both those goals, and incentivize that, and give those good actors who are prepared to do that some certainty that if they do, their investments won't be undercut. So I think that's an important area of policy development going forward. But I think it's absolutely feasible and possible. We just have to be creative and pragmatic about the tools that we're using.
So let's dig into the power grid, you know, which you've talked about here, and the need for policy to make sure there's the power to have. We need to do all these things. So our next segment is actually going to be about the impact of AI on the power grid and how companies can keep up and what kind of threats there are. But you're raising this topic. I mean, basically, to do all these things you're talking about, to do the energy transition, to electrify so many things, to move AI forward, to build the factories that we're trying to onshore, we just need a lot more power. And it seems like this is all happening at the same time that AI is developing very quickly, and all the utilities, executives I talk to and regulators I talk to just seem very surprised by the sudden surge in how much power is actually going to be needed. What are the risks of not moving fast on policy here? You've talked about electricity markets, and if those aren't reformed, will there be the power that's needed? I was just in LA last week, where they're talking about trying to get clean trucks, trying to transition the truck fleet that goes to the port from diesel powered to powered by electric and hydrogen. And California has some very aggressive mandates on that. There's one 96 bay charging station in LA. And they basically couldn't even get a power line in from the utility there. They had to build a microgrid with natural gas, which does not seem like the way to go. And thousands of these charging stations need to be built. So it seems like we're already seeing these tensions with this shortage of power or the amount of time it's taking utilities to get hookups. What happens if permitting reform doesn't pass, if these markets are not reformed soon? Because these are things that have been worked on for years and nothing seems to be happening.
Well, my pithy answer to your question is you're right. If what we end up doing is failing to meet the moment and take the steps that we need to take, then we're going to be in a tough place as a country. I mean, I guess I would flip it around and say, if you look first, to put it in perspective, if you look at the energy demand increase that we're facing today, it's real. But in historic perspective, we have gone through multiple periods of time with much more significant energy demand increases over the course of previous decades. And we've navigated that as a country. We can meet this moment as well. But we also have to be very both aggressive and pragmatic about how do we get the most out of the existing system that we have, and at the same time, how do we encourage efficient innovation to transform the system to the system we need in the future. And that gets a little bit to your point about transmission, which is, if you look at our existing transmission system, just by using technology and innovation, sensors on lines or AI-enabled efforts to try to model the weather and temperature on lines, you can get 30, 50% more capacity out of existing lines. By reconductoring some long transmission lines or distribution lines, you could get 2x, 3x, 4x out of the existing transmission system. And so what we need to do is put a policy framework in place that actually encourages that type of investment. We've seen some steps in that direction. FERC has taken a step that says, look, utilities need to at least consider those investments. I think we need to go beyond that and say, beyond consider, you have to have a very good reason to not be making those investments. And also, we should provide incentives for those utilities that do. We've seen in states like Montana that passed state legislation to actually allow utilities to reflect the savings associated with those investments. And then all of a sudden, we see some very significant, important investments in transmission upgrades as well. So there are tools that we can use to unlock that kind of investment and scale that kind of investment. And we just need to get going. We need to do permitting reform. We need to do transmission reform, utility reform, and we need to recognize this as the national imperative that it is, and also recognize that if we succeed in this effort, then we will have driven innovation in two of the areas that are the most important for global competitiveness: AI and advanced technology, and the clean energy technologies. We should be seeking as a country, for economic and geopolitical reasons, to win those competitions and make sure that we're doing what we need to do here domestically to get that done.
Brian, I've got a lot more questions for you, but I'm afraid we are out of time. This was a really insightful interview. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and joining us on Washington Post Live.
Happy to do it.
Please stay with us for our next interview in this program.
nature isn't fair, but energy should be. Hanwha is leading the way in finding sustainable energy solutions for people in all environments. Hanwha.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Koch. One of the pillars of the next era of energy will be solar. It is abundant, it's renewable, and right now, the first fully integrated solar supply chain of its kind is being built right here in the United States. Here to tell us about it and what the growth of solar holds for the future of clean energy is Daniel Murfeld. Daniel is global CTO of Hanwha Q-Cells. Now, Hanwha is a clean energy solutions provider and the largest U.S. silicon solar panel manufacturer. So, Daniel, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Daniel, Hanwha Q-Cells is doing something that has never been done before here in the United States. You're putting almost the entire solar supply chain under one roof. Why take on something so ambitious? That has got to be a huge investment.
It really is an ambitious investment at about $3 billion. Between our factory in Dalton and this supply chain facility that's still under construction in Cartersville, Georgia, we're on track to bring Q-Cell's annual solar production capacity in the US to 8.4 gigawatts by the end of the year, which is around enough to power about 1.3 million homes annually. And by doing this, we've created nearly 4,000 jobs in Georgia. We're investing in solar because it's the fastest growing, lowest cost source of energy today. And a great fun fact about solar is that the amount of solar energy that hits the earth every hour is enough to power all of our energy needs for an entire year. Ultimately, we see solar as the key to building a sustainable future, and we want to build that future right here in America.
So, having every aspect of the manufacturing process in one location must speed your ability to develop and test new ideas. How is it impacting innovation?
Innovation is always driven by learning rates. So having a streamlined supply chain, having this integrated factory all under one roof means that we can connect the dots and create these cycles of learning that help us go faster, enabling innovation at scale. So we also can then bring these new technologies to market more quickly. So having learning and the data flow is something that wouldn't be possible if we had these under separate facilities. We'd have reduced visibility. So ultimately, we're fostering these research breakthroughs because our control of the process and our access to the data is helping us see where innovation is most needed, and then that we can implement and push those through more quickly because we control this manufacturing process end to end, all in one place.
So, you've been in the renewable energy industry for more than 20 years. You've seen it evolve. What recent U.S. federal government actions have helped your industry progress? And then on the other hand, what about challenges? Where could the government do more?
Yeah, there's been a lot done to create the environment in the US that has made our investments in Q-Cells viable. First is the support from local officials in Georgia. There was also trade actions taken by the Trump administration in 2018. And of course, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed just a couple of years ago. Despite all of this progress, though, the reality is that the US solar industry is facing very challenging market conditions. So for emerging US solar manufacturers to succeed in the long run, we need to see our nation's trade laws enforced to make sure that domestic producers have a level playing field to compete on. And we need a provision to be implemented that supports domestically manufactured wafers and cells. These are two really critical components of solar panels. So this ongoing support is the only way we'll be able to see continued progress in bringing this vital industry back to the US.
So, is there any legislation in the works on that one point? And then how do you spur more enforcement?
Yeah, there's tremendously good, solid groundwork already laid in the innovation in the legislation that we have, but we do need to see some of the tax implications of this cleared up so that we have a good understanding for investors and for domestic suppliers how to get the most out of the legislation that's there.
And then on the enforcement question, that's a tough one.
Oh yeah, it is tough. I think we've done this as a country before, and I think it's ultimately something that will be our it will be what makes the difference. So I think this is something that we have to prioritize.
So I understand Hanwha Q-Cells doesn't only make solar modules, but you also focus on streamlining consumers' ability to access and use solar energy. Tell us about your commitment to spurring the energy transition.
Well, we know as the world transitions to this more clean and plentiful energy source like solar, there's also going to be a shift in how we manage it, how we use it. For example, coupling solar power with batteries is a way to generate energy from the sun that can be used long after the sun sets. Enhancing the system with AI to forecast when is the best time to charge or discharge the battery, or even when to sell it back to the grid. This is a way our customers can make money using their systems, not just save money. But the thing that sets Qcells apart is the breadth of our innovation in this realm. So in addition to building the technology in our factories, we're also making it easier for customers to get solar on their roof by offering financing solutions. We're helping develop, design, and even build large systems for utilities to help them lower costs for their customers. And we're even making it possible for households and businesses to band together and operate virtual power plants. This is helping reduce costs in utilities even further, and more importantly, increase the resilience of our network. So we're really excited about the future of solar, and the possibilities here are limitless.
Daniel Merfeld, Global CTO of Hanwha Qcells. Thank you so much for the fascinating conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now I'll toss it back to the Washington Post.
Since the beginning of last year, AI has entered, I would say, the living rooms of everybody, so everybody talks about it. In fact, the technology is more than 40 years old, and we've deployed it for more than a decade in our products in respect to real engineering challenges that are out there to drive down CO2 emissions of our customers in the industry, in infrastructure, in buildings, and in data centers.
Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, I'm Evan Halper. I'm a business reporter covering the energy transition at the Washington Post. Here with us now is the CEO of Schneider Electric, Peter Herweck. Peter, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Thanks very much for having me, Evan.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get started. So this is something we've been covering a lot on the business desk, the strains that AI is putting on the power grid. And I've been talking to utility executives and tech companies and people in communities where this is happening. And there's a lot of doom and gloom out there. I mean, just worries that these data centers are consuming so much energy. It's just in a city where Meta had built a data center, and it uses the amount of energy that are taken up by 110,000 homes. We're seeing this kind of chase for power, this worry of, are these tech companies going to be able to find as much power as they need to do everything they need and quickly enough? At the same time, the grid's been kind of ailing. But you have been striking a more optimistic note. You see that AI could actually be a solution to our power problems. Can you talk about that?
Maybe to put some of the numbers that have been thrown out into perspective, one of the elements that we see, and we're the largest provider of electrical infrastructure into data centers, so we claim to know a little bit what we've built over the last 10, 15 years. So the assumption today is that roughly 1.3 to 2% of the world energy is used in data centers. Now, going to AI and large language models, that has accelerated the journey, and the assumption that currently is out there that we support, that this consumption may double to roughly 4% in 2030. Now, that's 4%. That's probably the amount of electricity that a country like Japan uses, is quite a lot. But then, if we're talking about the transition of electric vehicles from where we are today until 2030, we'll probably also arrive at 4%. That just prescribes that electricity is a good form of energy, and we need to build out a more rigid a network of electricity as the most efficient secondary form of energy that's out there. We need to build more renewables, as we've also heard earlier, and have an efficient grid to it. I think that's quite important because many of the data centers today in fact use renewable energy, and many of the builders have also put CO2 targets out there. Of course, I'm not blind. I've read that some of them are paddling back, but that's for us to resolve, and I think there are good solutions out there.
So let's talk about how AI can make this actually. I mean, we think of AI as the problem here, right? That it's these training models and developing AI just takes a tremendous amount of electricity, so much so that I understand in the grand scheme of how much electricity is out there, you could still say it's a small share, but in the places where this is happening, in states like Georgia, in Northern Virginia, obviously, now we're seeing Ohio and Nebraska and Arizona and places that were just not hubs for, or if there were data centers there before, not at this level. They're worried that this just takes a lot of power. And if you look at the trend lines in the what you call the IRPs that the utilities put out, where it's their forecast for how much power they're going to need. The trend lines for data centers just show like them taking up more and more power, in some of these places, not everywhere in the country or everywhere in the world. I take your point, but in some of these places where just there's a lot of building going on. And so, I guess my question is, can you use AI to turn that trend around, to limit the amount of power that's needed to train these AI models? And how are you going to use AI to find more energy and use energy more efficiently?
So, a couple questions built into what you just asked. Maybe I start off with our own usage of AI and how we built it into our products. We're the largest provider of electrical infrastructure in the world, and we're very focused on the demand side. So, if you think about the demand side, and think about where energy is used, and with that also carbon generated, the biggest user in the world are buildings, and followed by that industrial environments. And the question is, can we use AI to help our clients to produce the same with less use of electricity? And we have a world-renowned a product that is called Resource Advisor. It advises our clients how to use the resources in the best way. And we've added AI functionality in it to allow our users to make the best and the most output of the electricity that they're using today. And as the economy is growing, it means a less energy intensity on the same product. And those are elements that we need to drive, be it in buildings, be it in the transportation sector, be it in our homes, be it as we work on industrial sites where we also electrify some processes that use steam today or that use fossil fuels to power them. All these are elements that we need to work on. Secondly, when you think about a lot of the energy that comes into the grid system with a lot of renewables, and we've had this with the speaker earlier also, there are a lot of interferences in the system, meaning sometimes you generate a lot of energy because there's a lot of sun or there's a lot of wind, but you may not use it. And if you have an advanced a system that controls your grid and controls the users, you may level out the grid in a much better way, and that will help us to get more out of the energy that we have today.
So let's break that down. I mean, this resource advisor is interesting. And for those of us who are not running power plants or working in the industry, excuse me, I think there's this assumption that obviously, power is a valuable commodity, energy is valuable, where you'd be doing everything you could to begin with to make sure you're not wasting any of it and running your systems as efficiently as possible. So what would resource advisor do in practice that you wouldn't already be doing or couldn't already be doing without this tool?
So take a simple user. He may own a plant, and we could do the same for a household, but of course we're focused more on larger end customers. We have total understanding how they are using resources, how much energy they're using in what process. We understand all the electricity bills that they're getting, that we're digitizing and analyzing on how resources are used in the manufacturing, and we give them suggestions how to improve the process so the energy goes down. Now, if you think of a second example that maybe everybody who's listening can relate to, is your own house. And a lot of people say, well, I'm using so much electricity and it's very expensive. How can I drive down my cost? Of course, that will require a little bit of an investment. But we see many of our customers that, for example, and in some states, it's by jurisdiction, they're putting solar panels on their rooftop. They're adding a battery into the garage. They may have one or two electric vehicles that are connected. With that, they almost, self-serve themselves with energy that is, or electricity that is generated. It's stored in the vehicle. If we're looking a little bit forward, these batteries in the vehicle will also become bidirectional. So you can charge them and you can discharge them. And you have another battery in the house, and with that, all of a sudden, a lot of the energy you're using in your house is self-generated. And if you need a little bit more, you take some out of the grid. If you have too much, you feed it back into the grid. So these solutions are available today, and we see them deployed all over the world, not only in the US.
You raised an interesting point about bidirectional charging. I believe California has just passed a law that says certain cars are going to have to be equipped with bidirectional charging, which means basically you can use the battery in your electric vehicle, not just to take power from the grid and drive around, but actually store power and put back onto the grid when the grid needs it, or maybe use in your house. But the technology is not cheap. I mean, I saw estimates that it could raise the price of a car thousands of dollars, as much as $7,000, or maybe that's in the case of a truck. But what's Schneider Electric finding in terms of how reliable this bidirectional charging technology could be, how useful it could be? Are we still in the early stages to see if it really holds all that promise that we're talking about? Do we know that it could work this well?
Of course, it's early days compared to technologies that are 5-10 years out there in the market already. But if we're looking at electric vehicles, if we're looking at the batteries that are in the car, if we're looking at other batteries that can be used for home usage, they are very advanced today, and the bidirectional is not totally complicated, because in industrial usage we have also built some of those inverters that are used. So I think this is a rapidly developing field. Now, of course, there's investment required, and I'm not making a big deal out of it. But the question is, what's the payback, and what's the payback period? How long does it take? And from that perspective, when you work together with home builders, we can find out, we can monitor it, and we can calculate it for a longer period of time, see what the payback period is, and then build it into the mortgage that people are paying. And the same, by the way, can be done when you think about buying an electric car. So I think the space is evolving quickly and gives opportunities for everybody to kind of be a generator and a user of energy, and it will become very, very important. It's something that's discussed all over the world at the moment.
Let's talk for a minute about the emissions impact of these data centers and of the energy needed to fuel the data centers. We've looked into this in a lot of places, and as I alluded to before, the amount of energy it takes to run these data centers is just immense. And at the same time, the so-called hyperscalers, you're talking about Meta, Google, Microsoft, these major tech companies, they were on the front lines of the energy transition, or claim to be. They say they're all about clean energy. They say that they want to push the transition forward. But now they're using so much energy. And as we look at communities where they are going and building these massive data centers, what we're seeing is like these kind of climate credit schemes where they are maybe putting some clean energy onto the grid someplace really far away. But then in a community, I was just in one of these communities, the coal plant stays open. And people in the community are not, especially if you live near that coal plant, not particularly happy. And even though the tech company can say, look, we didn't make the coal plant stay open. That coal plant doesn't need to stay open if you're not adding 1 gigawatt of energy demand to the grid, which the tech companies are doing. So, do you see solutions here where, because what we're seeing right now in their impact reports is their emissions are going up, they're going in the wrong direction. Are they going to be able to keep sort of hobbling by buying these credits in other places, or do they need to get more serious about lowering emissions in the places where they're operating? And is this business model sustainable if they can't start doing that? And how are they going to start doing that?
It's not totally simple, but I can tell you that in our discussion with most of them, and all of them are clients of ours, the CO2 emissions play a big role, and then also availability of energy and renewable energy, respectively. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about is when you think about these new data centers that require a lot of energies, in particular if they train AI models. They can also be built, and we see a lot of this happening in areas where there's a lot of land, a lot of energy, and a little bit off the fiber grid. Of course, it plays a role. That these are also countries where data sovereignty is guaranteed and so forth. But we see data center built out in geographies that we haven't seen before. Because one wanted to build much closer to the fiber network, so that helps in having renewables. Now, the other point you're talking about is, of course, they may use electricity that comes from physically where the electron, so to say, comes out of a power plant that burns coal. But today, with so-called power purchasing agreements, you can go out and say, I'd like to buy a green electron. Why? It may not actually arrive where you are, but the money is going to be taken to build renewable plants all over the world. So we have a lot of clients. In fact, it's 4 out of 6 that do buy sustainability consulting from us, and we have clients that have bought renewable PPAs, so power purchasing agreement, worth 347 gigawatt hours. So how much is that for somebody who's not familiar with these terms? That's the amount of energy that a city with 200,000 inhabitants uses per year. And with that money that they're paying for this power purchase agreement, renewable sources are being built and put into the network. Of course, that may not help for somebody who's right next to a power plant that will continue to stay on the network at the moment. But there are mechanisms in place that will allow us to further build out renewable and to move back to more efficient CO2-free energy forms to drive those data centers. And by the way, of course, like any technology, we should expect that they become more efficient with the use of energy and the output that they generate as the generations move on with those GPU processing units, and also how we build those data centers.
So, Peter, I got to push back on your point about these PPAs, and I understand. I see the numbers; they are really big. It's really impressive that you're talking about gigawatts of renewable energy that these companies are bringing onto the grid. But what I'm seeing everywhere I'm reporting on this is utilities are putting out their projections, their reports, and they're saying, the data center demand, we just weren't expecting this. It's really crushing here. We need to open these 5 gas plants, or we need to keep this coal plant open. And so, how can you tell a community that, don't worry, this is entirely clean, when the utility then turns around and says, we have to build more gas plants more quickly, and these are plants that are going to be, you have this infrastructure lock-in, they're going to be there 50 years, often kind of threatening the net zero commitments the utilities themselves have made, and they're blaming the data centers. So, something just is not connecting for people, when you put all those things together.
No, I fully understand the point. And, if you look back in history, the amount of energy that was used and how it increased was comparatively stable to what we're seeing now, and it is driven by some of the elements of data centers. But I said, the same is happening with electric vehicles. While in electric vehicles, I also confirm, of course, you move from fossil energies to electricity, but the electricity also needs to come from a certain place. So it's essential that we're building out renewables. And the problem that we have with the renewables is that it's not necessarily in the same location as the energy is used, and that prescribes the problem that you just noted. Now, one of the elements that we've been talking about for a longer time is that we have a solid grid built out, and also make the grid more intelligent. What does that mean, making a grid more intelligent? It means you bring the right energy to the right user at the right time. And big investments are going into the grid in North America and in other places in the world to be able to have an efficient and green grid, meaning you bring the green electron to the user who actually wants to have it. There is some work to be done, and I fully concur that you may have geographies where they say, I need to turn on a gas-fired power plant because I cannot resolve the usage of my clients here because the grid is not built out that I can get the energy from somewhere else. So there's some work that needs to be done here. But on the other hand, you also need to see that AI is helping us in the products to make the grid more efficient, to bring the energy to where it needs to go. So it's, I think, a transitionary period that we need to worry about.
We have to wrap in just a second, but let me give you 10 seconds to answer a question from the audience that's right on point. This comes from Walter McLeod from Virginia. He asks, do you believe the benefits that AI can bring to solving the carbon climate crisis will outweigh its enormous energy and carbon footprint? It seems like you do.
I do believe that, but it will take time. Like in any industrial environment, things don't happen from one day to another. But I see tremendous efforts in electrifying and electrification if it's done in a renewable way, and that's the key that we need to drive also, and drive down the usage. We will generate a more CO2 free environment, and that's what we're driving for at Schneider Electric.
Well, we appreciate the insights, and that's unfortunately all the time we have. Peter Herweck, we thank you for joining us on Washington Post Live.
Thanks for having me, even.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. For more of these important conversations, sign up for a Washington Post subscription. Get a free trial by visiting washingtonpost.com/live. I'm Evan Halper. Thanks again for being part of the conversation.